Hello everyone, Recapped Mystery here. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to explain a horror, drama, film called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. Watch out and take care. Craig, the protagonist, begins the film by describing his hometown of Harlow, Maine. It is a charming town with only a few great locations. Nothing much happens here, and everyone is monotonous. Craig has moved away. We learn as he relates the story, from Harlow in the present, recalling his childhood memories of the town. The early 2000s, he also discusses the strange events that occurred in his hometown. The film then flashes back in time to reveal that Craig lost his mother when he was a child. He is still a little boy. He still blames himself, but the reason of death is not mentioned. Mr. Harrigan, a local billionaire and the richest man in Harlow, is introduced next. As a devout Christian, he attends church and prays to God on a regular basis. One day, he notices Craig is very impressed as he retells a story. So, that evening, Mr. Harrigan pays a visit to Craig's spot with an offer. He wants the young child to read him books of all kinds because he is losing his sight, his vision. Craig will be paid $5 per hour for his services. Unsurprisingly, the latter accepts without a second thought. Craig is on his first day of service. The billionaire's beautiful house astounded me. It appears to have all of the luxuries that one could desire. For, despite having almost 50 rooms, there are only 2 extra occupants, a gardener and a maid. Craig eventually approaches the elderly gentleman and begins reading a book to him. He does so 3 more times, several times per week. As a bonus, the old man gives Craig several lottery tickets. Although Craig opted to take on this position first for the money, but he develops into a strong and kind individual. Over the next 5 years, you will develop a relationship with Mr. Harrigan. After meeting the billionaire in person, Craig is likewise curious about his true identity. So one day he visits it. Mr. Harrigan is found in an internet cafe. Copyright, the old man used to be a businessman. It turns out, with a record of workers complaining about his strong-willed nature. Surprisingly, some of them were so fed up with his brutality that they did the unthinkable. However, Craig's opinion of the old guy remains unchanged, and he continues to read him books and novels. The film then jumps ahead a few years, and Craig is now a teenager. He begins attending secondary school at a popular institution outside the city. Craig, unfortunately, encounters, on the very first day of school, Johnny establishes eye contact with a bully named Kenny. Kenny approaches Craig during the lunch break and casually asks him to polish his shoes. When the latter refuses, Kenny becomes overly harsh on him. Fortunately, before things get out of hand, Ms. Hart, the science teacher, steps in. Craig meets with Mr. later that week. Harrigan regarding the incident. The old man encourages him to always deal with. As he had experienced, he dealt harshly with bullies, whether at school or at work. Craig realizes this after becoming acquainted with a relatively fresh social life at his new school. Smartphones have become virtually a social currency. The high school cafeteria, where everyone eats. When cool and rich kids meet, they are differentiated by the types of phones they have. As an example, the group with the iPhones is thought to be the coolest. Craig wanted to fit in with this group. He requests an iPhone from his father. Unfortunately, the old man refuses right away, citing a conflict of interest. An adolescent should only concentrate on his education. Craig, on the other hand, receives a gift on Christmas Eve. Mr. Harrigan, his boss, gave him another lottery ticket as a bonus. When he scuffs it, he discovers that he has earned $3,000. His father made his day even better. As a Christmas present, he eventually receives an iPhone. Craig was overjoyed with the things he received. First, he calls Mr. Harrigan to thank him for the lottery ticket that he had won. They talk for a while before calling it quits for the night. Craig enthusiastically turns up the next day at school. He showed his new phone to his friends. He then heads to the cafeteria to meet the cool people. Jennifer, his crush, is seated in the youngsters section. Craig then tells in a voiceover that he has realized that his elderly employee is lonely and powerless without him, and he, too, spending time with Mr. Harrigan may make you feel warm. All of these emotions have resulted in, he decides to offer the old man an iPhone comparable to his own. not merely to introduce him to technology, the new technology, but also so that they can communicate with one another from wherever. As a result, Craig purchases the phone and politely hands it over to his boss. Initially, Mr. Harrigan denies having such modern goods near him. He feels he will succeed. "They have made me addicted to them." Mr. Harrigan, on the other hand, is swiftly seduced by the phone when Craig calls, demonstrates the process of tracking stock values in real time. He can also read current news, unlike newspapers, which publish a news a day late. Craig will teach him over the next few weeks new things that can be done with a smartphone. Mr. Harrigan gets obsessed with the device. That he has lost interest in the books Craig reads to him. He merely continues. He spent the entire day browsing through his phone. Mr. Harrigan's condition worsens as the days pass. As a result of having to wear oxygen masks at night, he has been infected. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. Soon after, when Craig visits the massive house as part of his routine, he discovers Mr. Harrigan was found deceased from an old age-related illness. Because the two housekeepers are on vacation, he panics and phones his father, who tells him to wait until help arrives. Craig, with tears in his eyes, reads a book one more time for his close friend. In the next scene, Craig, his father, and a few neighborhood members gather for the funeral of Harrigan. The teenager is heartbroken after losing his partner, but he perseveres to read a few of his favorite books. He then chooses to hide Mr. Harrigan's phone inside the corpse's clothes before it is buried. Craig and his father are arrested soon after the funeral. Mr. Harrigan's personal finance manager approached him. They discover that the old man has left. Craig left a considerable quantity of money in his will to aid him with the costs of furthering his education. Overwhelmed by such great riches, as well as true love and respect for the deceased man, Craig calls Mr. Harrigan and leaves a voicemail. He confesses that he would be willing to give up. He would pay the entire cash if he could simply see his old friend again. Craig also sends a text message in which he mentions he longs for the time they spent together. This is when things start to feel out of place. Craig receives a response the next morning, which is a rather cryptic communication from Mr. Harrigan's phone number. He notifies his father about this bizarre occurrence, which has taken him by surprise. However, the old man is convinced that someone is playing a prank on him. When Craig refuses to accept such an explanation and insists on locating Mr. Harrigan, his father describes the situation in the hopes of finding him alive. Apparently, the old man was alone that day, and he died of a heart attack as a result of boredom. Following a thorough examination of the body, the autopsy results confirmed this. Hearing this, Craig returns to his senses and listens to his father's comments. Craig's grief continues to worsen as the days pass. His loss, but he continues to attend school. When the neighborhood bully, Kenny, is caught red-handed peddling drugs and is expelled. Unfortunately, he incorrectly believes Craig was the one who snitched on him. So, on the day of the annual event, he infiltrates the school grounds and assaults Craig. Nonetheless, Mr. Harrigan's number was voicemailed, evidently not expecting anything to happen but merely as a courtesy, a way for him to express his sorrow. But, much to everyone's surprise, Kenny is found dead in an accident. Despite reports that the bully was inebriated and had fallen from his second-story window, we observe his body in the bedroom with a can of shoe polish in his hand and some polish smeared on his mouth. This is particularly intriguing because, in Craig and Kenny's very first meeting, Craig had been threatened by the bully to polish his shoes or eat the entire thing. Meanwhile, Craig goes insane because he now believes that Mr. Harrigan's ghost killed the bully. Shaken to his core, he digs deeper into Mr. Harrigan's past and discovers the identity of a guy who was once employed by the billionaire but was fired after allegedly stealing. A few days later, this man was discovered dead, along with several of the other individuals that worked there. A close friend was malicious. He also decides to switch phone numbers by purchasing a new one. However, he keeps the ancient phone because it was the first phone he ever owned. For a time, everything appears to be alright as Craig graduates from high school and enrolls in college. In Boston, I'm taking a journalism class. He claims that he is doing well in his academics. However, all of a sudden, his father contacts him one day with more unexpected and heartbreaking news. Ms. Hart, his high school science teacher, was tragically killed, it turns out. In an accident, Craig had become close to the teacher over his high school years, because she was the only one who offered him support and company during his difficult times. Craig then goes to his hometown, where he discovers that Dean Whitmore, the man charged in the accident, has died. Had been drinking during the drive. He had previously been arrested for drunk driving. Craig and the other students want Dean punished for his dangerous behavior, but the judge absolves him by just ordering him to attend therapy for 6 months. Craig, enraged that justice has not been delivered, decides to take matters into his own hands. He recalls his extraordinary supernatural ability and, without further ado, he calls Mr. Harrigan's number and requests the murder of Dean Whitmore. Craig feels horrible about his actions the next day and hopes that no one is wounded. He continues to check the internet to see if Dean is still alive. Unfortunately, his worst fears are realized. Dean's body is discovered in the shower of the rehabilitation center where he was staying. Craig freaks out even more now that he is fully aware of what is going on. He also realizes that he is technically to fault for Dean and the bully Candy were both murdered. Craig pays a visit to Mr. after learning of this discovery, Harrigan's house, and begins looking for any strange hints. He doesn't discover much he enters the room, but as he opens a concealed closet, he finds old photographs of Mr. Harrigan. Craig had always questioned Mr. Harrigan's choice of him above the other guys, some of whom were better readers than others for the job. He has finally received his response. Mr. Harrigan, like him, lost his mother at an early age, and thus that's why he chose Craig over the others. Craig goes to the cemetery in the next scene and begins speaking to Mr. Harrigan's grave. He claims to have deciphered the obscure. He had got SMS from the old man's phone number. Mr. Harrigan was the intended recipient. Craig was asked to stop contacting him. According to Craig, the fundamental reason behind this is that Mr. Harrigan was harmed by these reach-outs since he was unable to rest peacefully, or that he didn't want Craig to get wounded because the small child was entering a mental state of rage and retribution. Following the visit to the grave, his grandfather, the phone, his only method of connection with Mr. Harrigan, is eventually turned off, tossed into the water. This effectively ends their paranormal chats. Craig also wants to get rid of his current phone, but is impossible to do so because cell phones have become obsolete. It has become such an important aspect of modern life. The film concludes with another narrated background, where Craig expresses his desire to be buried with empty pockets following his death. Specifically, he does not want anything, particularly mobile phones. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. To assist the channel, turn on notification and leave a like. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you again soon.